and welcome to Early Years TV with me, Brodie. Today is all about young children's mathematical development, and I'm just delighted to be joined by Karen Wilding, who has been an independent UK and international early years math consultant for over 10 years. She's also a published author and BBC live lesson maths expert. Karen is a standard holder for National Centre for Excellence in Teaching Maths, NCETM, and an accredited trainer. A very warm welcome to Early Years TV, Karen Wilding.
Oh, thank you very much, Kathy. That always sounds so much nicer when someone else reads what I've done.
You've done a lot, and it's really, really interesting because I know that you've worked in different age ranges as well as the early years, so you know what comes beyond, which is always fascinating. And you were a primary school teacher, and one of the things that caught my eye on your website is, as an ex-primary school teacher, you say that mathematical fluency is impossible without number sense. But you never taught number sense as a teacher. So, what is number sense and why is it such a game changer?
So you can see honesty right from the start there. I probably lost a few people already as a maths consultant. But, I was a teacher for a long time, over 20 years, working right through from early years to the top of primary. I've taught every year group. And one of my stock phrases throughout my work, and people I'm really well known for, is that you don't know what you don't know. And anybody who's ever managed a change process knows that is this frightening, unconscious, or incompetent stage that we're all at. So I was the same. I, completely committed to my job, highly conscientious, thinking I was very capable, using the tools I had really well, but it turns out I didn't have the right tools. And there's a longer story behind that actually, surprisingly, quite a lot of my children seem to do quite well in maths, which really makes me now wonder what they were doing well in, and it wasn't what I now know is really important. And very sadly, of course, I had lots of children who didn't do so well, but I'd been brought up as a teacher to expect that there would be children who wouldn't do well. I now think very differently about that. So the number sense side is a complete change and revelation from what I think pretty much all of us were brought up with, even those people watching who are considerably younger than myself. But I'm probably best to explain it by showing you something, and this is something I share on training a lot, and it's kind of, the visuals do help, don't they? So if I show you, for example, the traditional number 6, then, if I say the word 6, that is usually what pops into somebody's head, that symbol. And unlike, for example, other things in life, the example I use is apple. When I say apple to you, you do not pop the word APPL in your head. You put the concept of what an apple is in your head. And the reason you know what that is because of years and years of experience of, you haven't had any apple lessons. And again, we can laugh about that, but it's really relevant. You have explored, you don't even need to like them, but you have, when I say apple, deep memories and lots of learning over a period of time that you refer to. So we need the same to happen with this, because the trouble is, if when you say 6, I picture a digit 6 in my head, I don't understand what 6 can do and what 6 really is. Just like if I thought of apple as a word, I wouldn't be able to tell you anything. And the other bit, before I show you the next part of my visual here, we've got to really define the difference between memorization in maths and memory. Because I can tell you lots of facts about 6 because my teacher told me that 3 and 3 make 6 and 4 and 2, and and the number before 6 is 5 and so forth. But that's very different than me experiencing that and forming memories of what we might call a concept image of 6. So again, there's that big difference of, people might quite rightly say, but I do know about 6. And you think, well, how did you learn that? Did you learn that from being told or by actually experiencing it? So I'm going to skip a lot of steps here, but if I show you this image of 6, and we learn to connect that image, just like you would with an apple, to that, because obviously that's going to become really useful. Just like when you read the word apple in a book, you picture that concept. So suddenly this, if you think without even doing any active teaching, and there's a lot of active teaching we can and should do, just look at all the things that you can see about 6 here. And this then links us to, the main focus we're going to talk about, which is subitising. But the amount of mathematics in that is phenomenal. There's fractions in there, there's division in there, there's part whole, there's addition and subtraction. And this is what I need in order to understand a number. So I hope that kind of, that's like a massive amount of work condensed into a little tiny explanation.
Yeah. That really does make so much sense, because as you say, when I think of apple, there's lots of different things that I think about when I think of apple, the taste, the size, the colour, the smell, or just a whole load of things. But a digit is a digit, isn't it? Wow. So wow, what a start. So what is subitising then?
Well, okay, I'll go back to my little board again. I'm going to remove some to begin with, but are you happy to play along with me here a bit, Kathy?
Absolutely.
Do what we do on training. Okay, so I'm just going to ask you what you see and how you see it. So what I'm not asking you is how many, but you can say that if you want. But something I do a lot on training is the kinds of questions we ask children, train them to look at things in a certain way. So I'll keep holding it. What do you see and how do you see it?
Right, I see 3 dots, but I also see a tick.
Okay, and can you look at the dots in another way? Can you see other numbers within that total? Because of the way they're
there's an obvious 2 and a 1, isn't there? There's a grouping of a 2 and there's a grouping of a 1, yeah. Okay,
so what we've got there, and particularly if that had been a little bit closer, there, does that remind you of anything without overthinking it? What kind of things spring into your head?
Right, so that's a triangle, that's a tripod, that's everything to do with 3s, that's a 3-leaf clover, that's a lot of things then, yeah.
Can you see a face?
I can, yes.
So what's interesting is people often, when they, especially if I don't react too much, and something else I do a lot of is what I call neutral face, like don't have your agenda written all over your face, genuinely listen, very hard to do. But what adults will usually say things like Mickey Mouse, or they might say I see a face, and they have to allow their brain to just keep on thinking, because in maths we're used to saying something instantly and then shutting down, because that's what most of us were brought up to do. Whereas maths is actually a science subject, so we need to, look and let our brains do their work. So what's brilliant here is your brain from birth, science conjectures, got lots of evidence that when you were a baby, you learned to seek out your main carer's face very, very soon in life, probably even on day 1. As soon as your sight was, in focus. And not only did you recognize this pattern of an eyes and a nose, but you actually recognize the ratio of the person who cared for you the most. But even a very young baby. So this imprint of this early subitising is actually inbuilt into your survival DNA. And there's so much more to say. But what you looked at then was the 2 and the 1 within the 3, when I had it more like that or something like that. So you saw the 2 and the 1, and also you can see that this is 1 and this is 1 and this is 1. And we do talk to children a lot about add another 1. So clearly if that's another 1, this must be a 1 and this must be a 1. And understanding that you've got 3 1s and a 2 and a 1 and a 3 is very different than counting. And it's actually a much easier skill, and it's what's going to underpin your calculation ability later, because obviously the reason 2 + 1 = 3 is because there's a 2 and a 1 in a 3. Yeah. And you can begin to see there that this is a very, very simple idea, but it is phenomenally powerful. So does that make sense so far? Because I said, you can see, I could just literally just talk about this for hours.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's fascinating that it's actually linked to biological development, because I think sometimes we get a bit, we get stuck on the idea that maths is something that you do. It's an academic subject that you start when you start school, that you don't learn about maths until, you're 4, 5, 6, that in fact maths doesn't even come into being until, but you're actually saying from the day you are born, there's going to be maths going on.
Yeah, I think I try and separate it for my practitioners that learn with me, that you've got the natural mathematics of the world and the way the brain works. And then you have got a human device and language that's been created. So something, I'll briefly give you an example. Something I talk about is shepherds, and this still happens in parts of the world, but less so now. But shepherds putting their sheep out at night used to move a stone for every sheep that went past. And when the sheep came back, off the mountain would move a stone back again. So clearly using number, but without any number names, without the ability to count. And when you start realizing that humans have had systems to work mathematically way before we had a number system and words and calculation symbols, it really starts to make you question, what's the kind of taught bit and what's the natural bit.
Yeah. So are there different sorts of subitising then?
Absolutely. And this is something that the research that I'm doing is beginning to really make me consider some of the statements that are made. So one thing to say as well, if anybody's watching, it can be pronounced subitising or subitising because it's from the Latin subito. So strictly, I should be a subitising girl, but I suppose it's a bit like saying Roma or Rome, isn't it? It's an anglicisation of the word. But that we have perceptual subitising, which is when you can see an amount instantly, which, particularly when we did that, you found that incredibly easy. Research tends to suggest that with random arrangements, humans can subitise probably up to about 5 or 6. I think most people are more comfortable around 4 as an instant. And then what happens is as you increase them, there's too many there. And you either go to count, or if you're going to continue to subitise, you do what's called conceptual subitising. So if I ask you now, can you, for example, we could look at it in 2 different groups. What can you see on that image?
Yeah, so I can see the top group of 3 and the bottom group of 3, which is now sideways. So I've got 2 lots of 3, which is 6.
So like you're looking at that 3 there and that 3 there, and you're saying that you can see that 3 is actually the same as that 3 but turned, which again, you think that's a very sophisticated thing that you can do as an adult and children would learn to do. And then someone else might say, well, I saw the 4 there and I saw a 2 there. And someone's like, oh yeah, I didn't even notice that. And it doesn't have to be just 2 groups as well. That's a really important point. I might say, well, I can see a 2 there, a 2 there, and a 2 there. And the great thing here about you saying 2 3s and 3 2s, whatever this number is, there must be 3 2s in it. There must be 2 3s in it. So if I go back, it's just coincidence, by the way, that I've got this many. It wasn't as slick as it's looking. But if I go back to this pattern, can you still see your 2 3s?
I can.
And I can see my 3 2s. So even though the pattern's changed, the conservation of that property of that number hasn't changed. So children start to recognize that if they see 2 3s, even when it's random, it must be 6. And you can see, for example, there, that must be 6. I don't need to count because I can see there's 2 3s. So that conceptual subitising actually has incredible potential for multiplication tables later, because rather than us counting our multiplication tables, it's that I can see groups of this and I know how much that is together already. So there's some really exciting implications for further up the school as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, even just introducing your times tables, you can say to children, can't you remember when we were doing this? Well, that's just what times tables are. They're no longer big and scary and loads of numbers, because I think very often we slip into the big 100 number cube, don't we, or the number square, and try and do times tables off of there. But that's much more straightforward for children.
Yeah, and seeing that link, when we saw those 3 2s in that 6, it's much easier if I show it. So there's my 3 2s in the 6, so we know that 3 2s equal 6. We also know that 6 divided into 3 gives us 2 in each group, and that then eventually, which I'll just do very briefly now, there's so much more to do here, but you've got the idea now that 2 out of 6 are orange, and if there's 3 groups of 2, that's a third. So a third are orange, 2/3 are purple, and also you can see that's the same as 2 6, because it's 2 out of 6, and this is 4 out of 6. And when I do this with teachers, they're like, why wasn't I taught like this? Because all we're doing is A, making sure that you have a concept image, which is this idea of number sense, and B, saying all mathematics is connected. You don't have to learn things separately. You learn, your brain is brilliant at seeking connections and making connections, but very often maths isn't taught like that. It's taught as everything is separate, which makes learning really difficult.
Yeah. I know in the early years we certainly very often said that you need to have concrete things for children to actually manipulate. What would you suggest for concrete things for subitising?
It's such an important question, and it's one thing, again, when I start working with people, you hear them talking about this a lot. and it's about low cognitive load. It's almost the opposite to what most early years practitioners do, and I did. So we will tend to think about, and there is an argument, of course, to have vehicles as ways in terms of, interesting things, which I won't talk about too much now. But when you are teaching subitizing, what you noticed about my counters here is they're all the same color. And of course, even if a child isn't able to see the color, they're all dark. They're all the same size and they're all the same thing. So I'm allowing your brain to focus on the mathematics here. If these were little bears or little ducks or little frogs, like we've all done, and you mentioned, I know we were chatting before the interview, you mentioned ladybirds. Ladybirds crop up a lot. Yeah. Look at a ladybird with cognitive load as an adult, never mind a child, and you think, goodness, not only is there all that lovely stuff to talk about ladybirds, but they've got legs, they've got antennae, they've got spots on their back. And what we haven't done as practitioners is thought, what is it I want the brain to be able to notice? So here, I wouldn't necessarily use exactly the same things all the time, because I want the brain to have, make generalizations across different things. But what I would do is when I use natural objects like stones, acorns, and so forth, very similar color, as similar as nature will let you, similar size, because again, you just keep that cognitive load low until those patterns are secure. And then in the end, when they see 6 children sitting in this arrangement, they can ignore the fact that that one's my friend and that one's got blonde hair and all this extra, I say cognitive load, because the pattern of 6 is so strong that it overrides all those other things. And when you do that with teachers, they're like, oh, that makes so much sense. And you're like, you've got to allow, because young children's brains, they'll want to talk about the ducks, and they should be talking about the ducks. They're not going to notice the number. The number is quite boring compared to the ducks.
Yeah. In fact, that's often what we advise, isn't it? Find something that they're interested in, whether that's, fire engines or whatever it is. Find something that they're interested in, then use that to count with. Well, as you've just said there, which is blindingly obvious now you've said it, what they're going to be interested in is the fire engine, not the fact that there's 3 of them, or, wow, that is just mind-blowing.
And you know how, there's many things when we do research as adults that if you've got a fire engine, it might have 2 people within the cab, or it might have, the wheels might be what the child's paying attention to. And you have to be so careful that actually the thing that you're trying to get them to pay attention to, one fire engine, for example, when you're developing a knowledge of number, no wonder so many children get confused, because not only is that cognitive load high, but they are not paying attention to the thing you are, because you have a sophisticated understanding of how to ignore everything else that's going on, and they're just going, everything's interesting because I'm little.
Yeah. Well, so I'm correct me if I'm wrong, so something like circles, squares, or something like that, which they don't have to think too much about, is probably the best thing to start off with then, is it, if we're going to be doing subitizing?
Yeah, well, I think, and this again comes up a lot in discussion, because people say, well, you've said this and then you say this. So what I tend to do is, my very, very first way in is I will get adults, parents, carers, practitioners to subitize in the natural world with their children. Because when you're out on a walk and you see 2 flowers growing, or you see 2 wheelie bins, I mean, we have got the most amazing set of photographs on the website and on the Facebook page now. Because many of my practitioners are in the Middle East and they've been locked in their apartments for months as well. So we had some very creative inside subitizing. But you see all these wonderful natural things, and children pay attention to them. And as long as those things are very, very similar, and I always look at 1, 2, and 3 together, they start to notice, they start to talk, they start to see what the adult does, a lot of modeling. But then when you move into that, I'm actually going to sharpen these tools mathematically. I say strip it back. I usually go with circles, because again, there's a little bit less going on a circular shape than there is with a square or a triangle. And again, it's just whatever you need to do to keep the maths as visible as possible, and in a way, it's not very interesting, the thing you're using. So therefore, the attention is on the mathematics and not the thing itself.
Yeah. So is that where you would start then, sort of looking for groups of 2 and then groups of 3 and then groups of 4? Is that how you would build it up?
I would always, I'm doing a Super Subitizing free challenge at the moment, and I'm rerunning that, so we could put the details on about that. And I do a 10-day free challenge, no catch whatsoever. I come on and support with lives, and it's all about just doing 1, 2, and 3. And I don't go beyond 3 to begin with, because I think you can really illustrate the principles that you're teaching extremely well with numbers up to 3. And people tend to devalue lower numbers as well. And that's one of the reasons I'm doing it. But again, it goes back to that human face idea, that children have an innate understanding of the pattern of 3. And when they can compare the 1s in 3 and the 2 in 3, and then when you've got that secure, you can add another one and go to 4. And what will happen is a child will see the 3 within the 4, and the 2 2s within the 4, and the 4 1s within the 4. And we also link that to 5 frames, which is half a 10 frame, so that we are building that idea that 10 is made up of 2 5s. And really strengthening the idea that really when you are doing 10, you finished a 5, and then you're doing another 5. And, most adults that are good at maths will tell you they use that 2 5s in 10 to calculate decimals, to calculate very large amounts. It's a great pit stop that many of us were not given when we were at school.
Yeah. But it's interesting that, as you say, as adults, and I certainly do, it's a strategy we've developed for ourselves. So I wonder why nobody went, actually, I do this all the time. Why am I not teaching my children this?
Yeah, well, sadly, many adults haven't developed some of the strategies. It seems that those of us that have come into teaching have usually got a better understanding of things like partitioning a number to finish a 10 and that sort of thing. But actually, when you dig deeper, a lot of teachers don't necessarily understand why, which I think anybody watching is like, of course I know why. But from the training, I'll keep asking questions, and then people are like, we get to the idea of base 10 and we start to look at the mathematics underneath this, and when you show it, people are like, oh, that's so obvious. But like you said before, like, why didn't I know this? So that sort of principle, many adults switch off from maths, so they then don't seek efficiency, and they don't seek to make it easier. And those that have still view it as like real world maths, and they view real world maths as different than maths in the classroom, which is something that people like Joe Bowler have been talking about for years, saying, come on, the maths in the classroom has to be the same as the maths that we use in our lives as well.
No, definitely. And I certainly know from experience, you can go to a manager or a room leader and say, how many members of staff do you need in here? And she'd go, we've got 4 overs, 4 unders, that's however many members of staff, because she's done the ratios and she knows how many members of staff are needed per chat, and she can do that in her head, and it's like, wow. And you say you're not good at maths, you're really good at maths.
Absolutely. Well, everybody knows, don't they, particularly in the past, people who were darts players and people who worked in a bar, who had, my husband is a painter and decorator. He failed pretty much all his exams at school. I always say to people, would you get that painter and decorator back a second time if his maths was bad? Clearly the first time you wouldn't know, but you don't want, a builder cutting a hole in your roof to fit a Velux window who is bad at maths. And yet that same builder will go on their maths result from school to tell you whether they're good at maths or not. Yeah. And they run their own businesses. And you think this is, it really got to make maths meaningful and applicable right from the start, and show people that the reason you learn the tools is to live your life more successfully. Absolutely. Pretty much end of, apart from Sudoku. It's a purposeful subject.
It really, really is, isn't it? So, and just talking about schools and teachers there, why is it important then to have everybody come along on that journey? I know you talk about whole school teaching. Why is that important?
Well, I know you and I talked about it under the idea of mindset, and that again is been a huge area of development over the sort of last 10 or 15 years, particularly with Carol Dweck's work. And I mentioned Joe Bowler, who's worked with Carol Dweck. And this, I think it's really hard to do justice to how important mindset is. But the simple way I think that I always start with it is what you believe about yourself and what you believe about someone else. So in the case of a teacher, labeling a child as having a certain ability, it's a big conversation which we're not going to have now, but ability definitely exists, but we are usually not in the position to judge it. All we're in a position to do is judge attainment. And when we label children as able or not able, And when we consider ourselves as able or not able, of course, we hear the doors slamming all around us. I always say, I'm a low attaining tennis player. And the reason I am low attaining is simply because I have not learned to do it yet. And if I wanted to be great at it, I would need to go and find someone who knew a lot more than me. I'd need to put all the time in. I'd need to show up when I didn't want to. And, to go anywhere near anybody who's good. How on earth could I know I was a low ability tennis player? That's ridiculous. You think, we see people, don't we, in the Paralympics. I think that should shock us all into thinking that mindset is so important, because you look at people who achieve things when it didn't even seem possible. So yeah, belief that you can do something. And I use that word yet. When someone says, oh, not very good on your Facebook page, Karen, I'm like, you're not very good yet. So you're going to put some more time in to learn how to do it because you chose to be here. And people are like, oh, and you think, no, but seriously, I will help you. But, if you're not very good at something, then work on it. Find someone who knows more than you.
You're absolutely right. And I do think of all the things that we do in early years, that if you say to practitioners, the one thing that they will say is, oh, I'm not very good at maths. But they wouldn't say that about, oh, I'm not very good at reading, or but maths is the one thing people seem to be quite happy to say, I'm not very good at that.
Yeah, and I think it's deeply psychological. Many of those people know that, and it affects women more than men, and certainly in different ways, that women particularly will carry around a burden of shame. So it's easier to laugh about it. But also there is a genuine belief that the way you felt about yourself in school, most people switch off because they start to feel bad about themselves. And again, my stock answer is, you're a human being. So you cannot be bad at maths because you're innately mathematical, because you're a natural scientist, and the two subjects are so closely related. But what you were taught wasn't maths, because I failed maths completely and I hated it at school. And I am now an international maths consultant, have been for 11 years. And far from there being a problem with my maths, I had the opportunity to relearn or learn for the first time everything that didn't make sense to me at school. And if you've walked that walk, it's very hard to argue that there's any other way. So it's great that I was in that situation, because people are so shocked when I tell them. They think I'm one of those people that found it easy and all. And I'm not alone in that. There's many people in the maths profession who will tell a very similar story.
Wow, how interesting. So what would you suggest then to practitioners and educators to sort of to foster that love of maths? How would you start there?
If you're an educator, you have two responsibilities. And again, I'm very, very honest with the people that I work with, and I do activities to help them see this going back to you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. The first thing is you have to improve your maths subject knowledge, and you have to stop being scared, and you have to find someone, hopefully like myself, who never makes you feel bad about yourself, says, be honest about what you don't know yet. No one knew things until they did. No one was born knowing this. I've just walked the path for longer than you, but I've been where you are. So don't be embarrassed. Don't be ashamed. Don't feel guilty. To learn math subject knowledge, it's in a book. And it literally, you think so. There's no reason to not learn it. But of course, like everybody, you need a good guide to really bring that learning to life. But then you need to understand how children learn mathematics as well. And that is as we know, the pedagogy is a very different ball game. Understanding how someone acquires a skill isn't the same as being able to do it yourself. I use the analogy of teaching someone to drive. You getting in the car on the first day going, well, I can do it. So look, you should be able to do it. You just think you've got to work out what's the first thing they could do to get this vehicle moving without having to think of anything else. And that takes an incredibly skillful driver to get rid of everything they know, back down to the point where it was like, what was it like when I didn't know? Yeah. So, that probably sounds to people like, whoa, that's a big journey. It's like, but it's a journey that is non-negotiable. You wouldn't want your doctor to not have medical knowledge of your condition, and you wouldn't want them to not know how to treat you. So it is the truth, and my job is to help people and make sure they get there, because 100% everyone I work with can get there. It's just about putting the time in, expecting to fall down a bit, expecting to have some rubbish days. You go, yeah, and why wouldn't we? But absolutely, and know that you're not a failure in maths. If you come into this and think, I wasn't taught the way I needed to be taught and I can learn, we can do everything.
Yeah. I think that's such a powerful message to say to everybody, really, that you can learn, and that, as you say, having the right teacher and the right path is so important. But you can do it. Don't just give up. You can do this.
Yeah, and we know that these things, people, use the words around me like, I'm overwhelmed, I feel really alone. I've got membership groups now, and people say, I have no one to talk to. And, sadly, we know this is true. I'm pulling a face saying this because I wish it wasn't true, but early years practitioners are not respected in the same way as teachers of other year groups. And in some cases, that might be because we're hiding a little bit and we think, I wouldn't want to go and teach year 4 maths. That was me. So one of the things I say as well is, you need, when you get this knowledge and you know where it goes, like the example I mentioned with the fractions before, I'm not just going to give you what you need in early years. This is maths. This isn't about little children maths. This is about a journey, and you can then hold your own, and you will often have far better understanding of the journey than some of the teachers of older children, because they haven't been through what you've been through. And again, that gives people like they're already very brave early years people, and it just gives them that sense of like a new piece of armor. You're like, yeah, we can do this, and they want to feel confident like that.
Absolutely. And of course, the other people that are involved with children's lives are parents. So what would you advise to parents about starting with maths?
Yeah, I think, you always use the tools you've got. So teachers feel very frustrated when they say, the parents keep trying to show them this method, and you say, but you've got to ask why. If you're a parent who wants the best for your child, you're going to reach in your toolbox and you're going to take the tool out that's in there. And also you're going to take the tool that you're most familiar with, even if you know you didn't learn well using it, because human beings, we're strange like that, aren't we? We still do things to other people that we know didn't work for us. It's called being a parent. So, it's really up to us as practitioners to make the new skills easy and really create an easy path, just like I have to with my practitioners, because people want to do it, but we know, change takes time. But things like the subitizing, going on a walk with your child and your child saying there's more over there and there's fewer over there. And the fact that, if some thinks there's 2 of something that's large and there's 5 of something that's small, of course, there is a sense of there being more with the larger things. And it depends on what it is you're measuring, the space it takes up or the number of things. And I think it's about try not to make things too complicated and help parents to do things where they can see the difference it's making with their child, and show parents, just like I do with practitioners, that too many children now don't play with small objects, especially natural objects. So someone the other day said they put all the buttons out, which I know are natural, but that lovely thing of a child playing with a button. I said, just do a session with your parents, online or in person, especially with COVID now, online probably. Show them the potential of buttons, because actually charity shops, relatives, they're a very easy thing to get hold of. And if you unpack that, you don't have to talk about the whole maths curriculum. You talk about one little thing. Things like cooking, as we know. Cooking is a great example, but people say things like, oh, I love cooking because I didn't know they were doing maths. I was like, why would you not want them to know they were doing maths? Surely the whole point of maths is so you can be a great cook. So it's about taking something really familiar. And I know if you're a parent and noticing these things about when am I measuring and when am I, using number. But I think as practitioners, when we skill ourselves up, it's about repackaging that to really help parents.
Yeah. So would you advise, as you say, obviously with the pandemic at the moment, it might be tricky to have face-to-face sessions, but would you actually advise training sessions for parents or something a little less formal?
I think it definitely needs to feel very non-judgmental, doesn't it? I think, we will have parents who are totally fine about talking to the teacher and coming through the door, but the majority don't feel like that. And I know the amount of conversations I had as an early years advisor about don't stand in the doorway, because you're literally creating a barrier. You're smiling away and they know you and you're there. It's like, doesn't matter. You just represent a barrier to them because it's hard, isn't it? And you think, we doing things, I think I would always recommend, if you're going to do it online, that I would have the child and the adult there together. Something that came up yesterday actually made me smile. One of my Middle Eastern teachers was saying that the parents were so eager to answer the questions that they wouldn't let the children answer them. So I'd said, seriously, if that happens, because actually the area she works in, parental education, ends quite young. And I said, well, you really are educating those mums. They're very enthusiastic. So give them a question, and you make a bit of a joke about it, but you can say, okay, mums, here's your question. And right, okay, mums, you've had your question. Here's your child's question. Because we know that adults and year sixes want to play in the role play. People's needs haven't been met. You don't change. Yeah. So I think that kind of, and then the parent can feel not less threatened, because they're like, oh, this is for my child, even though I'm actually going, gosh, I didn't know that either. So yeah, I do think that being sensitive to even very confident, competent adults have usually quite a strange relationship with school. It's not you. It's the establishment, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously there's a lot of history, and every family, no family is going to be the same as the one next door. Every family is different. They will have had different lived experiences, won't they? So I think you do have to be a little bit aware of that as well. As you say, they might be very confident, or they might not. Wow, so much to think about there already. What would your top tip be, though, or maybe your top strategy for improving maths in an early years setting?
It's very, very hard to pick a top tip, but it's invest in your staff's knowledge of mathematics, and to the point where they then become infectious and enthusiastic, and they realize that rather than, there's an awful lot of, pulling children together and doing maths to them, and we still need some of that, but you find yourself pulling back. You find yourself thinking, why did I do the date in that way? And why didn't I have this? And you find that you're not overly using a scheme. The scheme is there for you as a resource. It's not there as the map. So it's like anything. The more, again, if I go back to the cooking analogy, we know those people who vary recipes. And if they haven't got an ingredient, they don't fall apart. They say, oh, I could just use this instead. The reason they can do that is because they understand the fundamentals of the chemistry that is cooking. And if you want to improve the practice in your setting, it's not about buying equipment. It's nothing about that you're stuck on the wall. It's not about the songs you sing, because all of those things are going to facilitate what you need to do. And anybody watching who thinks like, oh my goodness, I so want to be like that, and I'm not. One, I've been there, but 100%, the people who've been working with me the last few months particularly will tell you they are in danger of putting other people off maths, because they just talk about it constantly, and they're just these wonderful, evangelists of mathematical knowledge, because they know their stuff now, and they just want everyone else to feel like they do. So yeah, I hope that makes sense to people. You will get enthusiasm, and you will really walk the walk when you know your stuff.
And of course, the other thing is that we're talking about the age 3 to 5, which is the area that you're actually focusing on. A lot happens between the age of 3 and 5, and you're not just going to buy math schemes that fit, 3 to 3.5, 3.5 to 4. You need to have that underpinning knowledge to go right the way across the whole of that spectrum, don't you?
You do. And someone actually asked me about a scheme. They were using one that's very well known, and they said, I'm not finding it's working for me. And I said, honestly, and they said, what would you recommend instead? And I said, it is about build your own knowledge. You will then realize that there are actually very few principles, and it doesn't matter if you're a year 6 teacher or an early years teacher, it's the same advice. There are very few principles you are trying to teach here. But when you don't understand them, and you don't understand how they're connected, and you don't understand how to go from, like I've been showing tonight, the concrete through to the abstract, if you haven't got those tools, you will be literally, it's like going on a walk and not having all the right things with you. You'll just be trying to make it up as you go along, and it doesn't work, So you will find then that when you have got that knowledge, there's just, behind me, there is a world full of amazing people with knowledge and resources and ideas that you will make sense of in a completely new way. And you will never want someone else to say, do it this, then this, then this. You'll want the advice and the security of having the knowledge, and then, planning your own path.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think that is great advice. So, of course, Karen, where can we find out more? You've already mentioned the Facebook and the website, so give me a few more details about those.
Okay, well, it's all kind of shiny and new. So I'm Karen Wilding, obviously, and I still exist in my old capacity online. But if people find me under Karen Wilding Education, that's going to only exist as a shop in the future. So my main website now is EY Maths. So www.ey, as in early years, maths.co.uk. And that is it. I'm actually doing some physical work at the end of the week this week, but I am moving to not exclusively, but 90+% online training, because it's working so well. So on there, I have a foundation masterclass, which is my come in and really get the core of your knowledge sorted. Because once you've got those foundations in place, I've then got things like maths through stories and obstacle course things, because you then use what you've learned in that course to enhance your provision. So, and there's webinars. I run a webinar every single month on there, and I've got a membership group as well. So those members get an exclusive Facebook group. They get a lot of free things thrown in. They get all the webinars free. They get masterclasses, and they get Zoom calls with me. So they've got their own personal maths consultant, and I get to know them really well as well. So we actually enjoy each other's company, which is really lovely. I mean, I can't believe I've never met any of these people in real life, because it's great. So yes, the EY Maths is the main place to find me, and there's hopefully we've done a lot of work on making it easy to navigate. But the best thing on there actually to mention is you get your own library. When you do a course, you get your own personal library, and all of your stuff sits in there. And I think there's just something really nice about that you've got that reassurance, and you can go back to the courses over months and months and months, or if you remember, you get indefinite access to that.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely fantastic. And as you say, you do run challenges and things like that as well, don't you?
I do. So the other main place to find me is you have to ask to join it, but the Facebook group. And anybody, again, who's a bit allergic to Facebook, I nearly ended my relationship with Facebook a year ago. And then I realized it's a tool, and you have to use it to suit your needs. So once I'd kind of culled a few people whose stories were not interesting me as much, and clearly since COVID, honestly, Facebook saved my life and my business. But my group there is teaching early years maths 3 to 5. So we'll put a link on for that. So but just make sure I turn away about 80% of people, because even though the first question says you must answer the questions to be admitted, about 80% of people don't. And the reason I'm so strict is I want people who'll engage. I'm not after high numbers to make my Facebook page look good. I want people who want to make a change. So, because that's great for the group as well. So I'd love to welcome more people, but do answer the questions, please. And then, and as you say, you'll get a notification about the Super Subitising Challenge, which we're on our second one at the moment, and there's another one coming in November. And I said I'll do a different challenge each term. So, and I'll repeat it at least 3 times. So people throughout the year, there will always be something free for people to join, get to know me, get to know the group, see what they think, and learn lots along the way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'll put links to all those in the words that go along with the videos, along with social media, so you can hop on and see what Karen's up to. I've been following you for a little while, but I've just been amazed at the engagement and the enthusiasm, as you say, when you go on there. People who have clearly never engaged with maths before, but are now absolute evangelists for maths. It's been amazing.
Oh, well, the lovely thing is the questions I now ask are like, how excited are you to find out what you don't know, as you've seen, because you answered them. And then what's one thing that you really want to work on? And the answers that are coming through now, I mean, I wish Facebook would allow me to store these, because that's one thing you can't do. And I've been posting some on the site, because people saying things like, I have been looking for a place like this. I cannot believe I found you. It's so obvious that I don't know things, and I never noticed that I didn't know it before. And I think I want to create a very safe community, and I would have to say, with nearly 6,000 members, touch wood at this point, we have had none of what some people associate with Facebook, the bad side. Not one bad word, literally, not one bit of behaviour that I've had to deal with, and I'm the admin for the whole site. People are so respectful. And that's across the whole world. We've got people. So I'm very privileged to work with an incredible group of teachers.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, Karen Wilding, thank you so much for joining us on Early Years TV today. It's been absolutely fascinating. I urge everyone to go and have a look on the website and find out what it is that you don't know on there. But for the moment, Karen, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Kathy.
And I look forward to welcoming everybody to the next episode on Early Years TV.